Game on! Game over!
You're gonna need a bigger boat. Why so serious?
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to this podcast review for July 24th, 2023, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Ken. I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Both Kens here. However,
Both Kens here. No, coincidentally, my nieces, or not my nieces, but my fiance's nieces do call me a living Ken doll, so I guess it is kind of appropriate.
There you go. While we do have a couple of Kens here, we also have a Barbie. I'm very excited for this conversation. We are joined by the great Lauren Cohen from Next Best Picture.
Yeah.
Lauren,
hey, everyone.
Thanks for being here.
Hi, Ken.
Hey,
Hi,
how's
Ken.
it going?
Hi, Barbie.
Yeah, really do appreciate you being here. This is very exciting. First time to have you here. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. I literally can't stop talking about Barbie, so I'm excited to talk about it more. As if we haven't all been like Barbenheimering every second of every day.
Exactly.
What a movement. What a movement that sort of sparked by accident, I guess. This is amazing.
Yeah,
it's completely organic, right? Like nothing you can never replicate it, I don't think.
No.
I mean, it's perfectly in sync with all of us here just wearing pink right now, and I feel like everyone is. I mean, I'm drinking a pink prebiotic soda as well, just to try and keep the theme going.
Yeah.
I mean, the Barbie marketing campaign.
Greta, hopefully you're watching
exactly.
this.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's interesting you guys bring up how organic the grassroots marketing was for Barbenheimer, but we do know that the studios will 1000% take the wrong lessons from this and try to manufacture it again later, and it'll not go well.
Yeah.
Never underestimate their ability to do that. They're going to be like trying to do another Barbenheimer, and it will crash and burn because it wasn't a natural thing. And like, I can't even see another pairing that's as bizarre as Barbenheimer, where it's like two auteurs with like two completely different visual aesthetics, two completely different genders overall that they are like really honing in on. I mean, everything was opposite of these two movies. And that's why it was like, and if you love film, like the thing with Barbie that I had to explain to a lot of my friends, most of my close friends are not film people. They like movies, but they're not in the scene. And so they didn't understand that. I'm like, Greta Gerwig is a legit filmmaker. This is not like not that a Barbie could be silly, but I was like, this is a real movie, for lack of a better way to phrase it. I was like, this is like a legit serious filmmaker who like really is respected. It's not just a random person making a random movie. So I kept trying to tell them, like, there's a reason this is bigger than just like we like Barbie and we like pink. Like this is
exactly. Yeah.
There's a reason to think there's quality behind this. Like,
did those friends of yours at least see or at least know of the hype that's surrounding movies like Lady Bird and Little Women? Were they at least aware of that?
You know what? Not really. That's the thing, is like they might have heard those, but like I sometimes forget how little people who aren't part of film Twitter or the film scene, like how little that might mean to them. Like they may have heard of it, but if they don't follow award season and they're not like cinephiles, those kinds of movies are very small, even if they're so big to us.
Yeah.
So, you know, they're just starting to get on the Greta train.
Yeah.
Gotta start somewhere.
Well, and that's what's interesting with Barbie, because, you know, and we talked about this at the beginning of the year, Brennan, when we were doing our, you know, like yearly preview. Like this film was on my radar. I'm sure the same for you, Brennan, not because we were, you know, tethered to the brand when we were kids. I don't really recall having any Barbies specifically.
I mean, my younger sister did. She was a year and a half younger than I was.
My younger sister did too. That was mine.
I occasionally partook if she wanted me to, which is maybe, I don't know, 5% of the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it was just the overall idea that a Barbie movie, like the Barbie from Mattel, directed by Greta Gerwig, co-written by Greta Gerwig and Noah Baumbach.
Yes.
That's a big
What?
Yeah, and that's the thing, because I have loved Gerwig's directorial efforts. Lady Bird and Little Women were my favorite films of the years, respectively.
Yeah.
That alone had me excited for Barbie. And then, as you noted, it was co-written by Noah Baumbach, who I also adore.
Yeah.
So there was plenty for me to look forward to with this film just on that alone, even if I'm a little bit removed from the brand and the dolls themselves.
For sure.
And
It's weird. It's weird to
Yeah.
have something so big directed by filmmakers or like, with filmmakers and writers who that is not their brand at all.
Yeah.
I mean, it's
Well,
just not.
Yeah,
they
but
want.
like big filmmakers who are actually making big movies that are still their movies, right? I
Right.
mean,
Yes.
And you knew that they would put their stamp on it. You knew there was
Yeah.
no way it was going to turn into some kind of like just, I don't know, sham of a toy manufacturer movie that has no
Yeah.
soul. I just didn't see that. They wouldn't take it on if that's what it was going to be.
I think that's what's so fascinating about the Barbenheimer movement, because maybe weirdly it's nostalgic for a lot of us, because a lot of us at our age, especially in our film circles, we grew up with some of these big blockbuster movies from the early 2000s that felt like they were still auteur projects, like the Pirates of the Caribbean films or Sam Raimi's Spider-Man films. And while Barbie and Oppenheimer don't feel like they came from that era, they almost like functionally kind of do. Like it's these directors making these big movies that still feel like it's part of their filmography, and that's sadly kind of a rarity nowadays. And maybe that's what's triggering this response. Yeah,
Like the references in it and stuff.
Yeah,
I could totally tell. I was like, like I'm 34. Like she's going for my exact demographic. Right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
And she still doesn't shy away from the Snyder Cut. So let's also.
Oh my God.
That was
I
great.
could, like,
I'm sure
spend an
we'll
hour
get to
just
that.
talking about the best references in the Barbie movie. Like
Sure.
seriously.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right? Because these films aren't based on any sort of, existing filmmaking IP. Barbie is a big brand, but this is a film on its, working on its own wavelength. Oppenheimer, same thing.
Yeah.
So, it's not like we're working within the same realm as Marvel and DC and all these remakes and reboots and superhero movies we get. We are, we're working within the confines of these auteurs making these big films, and the box office being what it is. And yes, there was a massive grassroots campaign behind it, but it's not an accident that Barbie blew out like every single other IP movie that we've seen this year in terms of box office. Like, it's insane.
Yeah.
Absolutely insane. With that, I guess we can go ahead and transition to the film itself and get into our review here. As we noted, it is directed by Greta Gerwig and written by Gerwig alongside Noah Baumbach. It stars Margot Robbie, Ryan Gosling, America Ferrera, Kate McKinnon, Michael Cera, Will Ferrell, and a bunch of others that come and go throughout the film. I'm sure
Bunch of
we'll
other
talk
Barbies
about
and other
quite a few
Kens.
of them. Absolutely. In case you're not familiar with this film, I can't imagine you're not, but just in case, this is about Barbie, who suffers a crisis that leads her to question her world and her existence. My goodness, whoever wrote that, I applaud you. This film is so much more than that. So let's go ahead and dive right in, and we'll toss it to you first, Lauren. What did you think about Barbie?
Oh, worst movie ever.
All that setup to be like, boo.
No, like I'm like obsessed with this movie to an unhinged degree. And we're even talking about how the hype built, and I do think that it starts with obviously just the huge admiration behind Greta Gerwig as a filmmaker and Noah Baumbach as a writer. But I do think that a big part of what made this start to get really big in the public eye was the casting of Margot Robbie, because all of a sudden you're like, there is a human walking around this earth that looks like real life Barbie. And we've all been thinking this since the day we saw Wolf of Wall Street. And then she gets cast as Barbie. I think everyone was like, okay, that's amazing. Now I'm into this. That
So
was
meta. Meta.
That was just like the first seed that was planted. And I think that's when people started getting interested. Then you get Ryan Gosling and you're like, okay, this is funny.
Yeah.
And it's so the fact that those were so hyped, those performances, and they did not disappoint. I mean, I think that people are underestimating how much work went into these performances, and that like Margot Robbie doesn't just sit there and look pretty and look like Barbie. She has to do a lot with the fact that she's playing a toy who's transitioning into a woman for all purposes, or like learning what it's like to be human. And she brings so much emotion to this role. She's so funny. She's got the physical comedy. everything is just amazing. And then don't even get me started on Ryan Gosling, who I am like starting my like, if he doesn't get nominated for Best Supporting Actor, we riot in the streets. Like,
Yeah, sure.
and it's again, it's not just that he's funny. He's been funny before, but he is like Ken has such a transition throughout this movie. He goes through many different phases. I don't know how deep we want to get into spoilers here, but the way he handles that is so well done and so memorable, and he's so comfortable in his masculinity. And that's one of the things I love about him.
Yeah. Even though his abs do a lot of the talking, though, in many of those
his
scenes.
arms.
Not a lot of guys can do this role. Like he is really just having fun, and like you can see it, but also like makes you feel for Ken, which sounds ridiculous to say, but I felt for Ken even when he's not being the nicest Ken doll.
Yeah.
I loved it. And then like when you go into the production design, the costumes, like the way they created this world, it's unreal. And that's before we've even talked about the screenwriting at all, which is like, I can't believe this is a real movie. I've said this before. It's like what she was able to get away with, how Mattel let her make this movie, I will never understand. Like it's a miracle.
Yeah.
Because it's a movie that doesn't feel like it should exist, or that it doesn't feel like it's real, but it does. And like she gets away with a lot of jokes. She's able to poke fun at Mattel. She's able to explore Barbie as a multifaceted thing where it's like, you know, we all appreciate Barbie because she's beautiful. Women look up to the Barbie standards and want to feel like Barbie and look like Barbie, but at the same time is appreciating Barbie as this perfect thing. She's also criticizing the fact that like women are held to these high standards and that none of us can ever live up to perfect Barbie or perfect Margot Robbie status, and acknowledging that like that's okay, and that like how Barbie can be both things at once, and what Barbie can do to kind of to be better for all women and young girls playing with Barbie. I think that's really cool.
To talk about Margot Robbie for a second, I think this might be her best performance. I think I'm gonna go there. I'm not 100% sold on the Ryan Gosling of it all yet, and I think it's primarily because I need a little bit of a background here just to clear the air a bit. I went to see this movie absolutely exhausted. This past weekend, I had my best man's bachelor party because he's also getting married this year, and then the day I got back, which was on Sunday, yesterday as we're recording this, was my fiance's bridal shower that I then had to stop by at. So I was exhausted. So when I went to see Barbie, I was more involved in the thematic maneuverings of it to see what it was going to do. And I mean, I was surprised how complex and weird this movie was. I mean, a lot of the narrative out there that it could be seen as kind of one-sided or like antagonistic towards one side over the other, I really don't buy into that at all. I think the movie is way more complex, has a lot of interesting ideas on its mind regarding gender identity and sexuality, and it takes pity and sympathy on all sides of that spectrum. And we can talk more about the specifics as this conversation unfolds, but I found myself more fascinated by that I didn't laugh as much as I would have wanted to. And I guess that's because I was just focusing on a specific thing. But I cannot wait to see this movie again, primarily because you're right, Lauren. I cannot believe that Greta got away with this. It's, like I said, it's a weird movie. It's a wonky movie.
The last line of this movie. I don't know if we want to spoil it.
No, we'll keep that in our back pocket. But you're right. That is.
Like, can you imagine? Like, how did that happen? It's amazing. Like, it's the greatest last line in movie history, and I can't believe it's in the screenplay.
That one definitely got a large laugh out of me. There are a few moments that did. That was one of them. There's also a very specific ad for a Barbie toy that plays midway through.
I want to get to that later. Yes.
Yeah, that made me laugh. There's also we'll also mention Helen Mirren does the voiceover narration here. And she opens and closes the movie, so she's the bookends, but at the same time, she'll sometimes interject a few comments here and there.
Oh, yes.
There's one interjection 2/3 of the way through that is one of the funniest things I think I've seen in any movie over the past like 5 or 6 years.
Yeah,
it's because it proves that Greta Gerwig as a woman is one step ahead of every female in the audience, right? Because in any other movie, and I was talking about this with my fiance who saw the movie with me, and she very smartly acknowledged this, that every woman in the audience will be thinking a certain thing regarding Margot Robbie. And then, of course, Greta just interjects that joke saying, yeah, I get you're thinking that, but I'm a step ahead of you. And
Right.
I
Like, I don't want to be watching a movie and seeing Margot Robbie say that she's not pretty anymore because they put less makeup on her. And I was
Yeah.
like, I will punch someone right now.
Self-awareness is incredible.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, and she's like, I'm not pretty anymore. And then, like,
Mhm.
they're like, okay, hold up. We realize Robbie's the wrong person to drive this point home. I love how they, like, break the wall there. And it's not something you do throughout the movie. And it was just, like, this kind of one-off. And I was like,
Mhm.
that's awesome. That she
It's
was
so
like,
good.
you know what?
Yeah.
I don't care if I just decide to throw this in and it hasn't even been a shtick we've been doing. Like,
Mhm.
she understood what we were all thinking. And they
Yeah.
clear the air and they say it. Everyone laughs. And then, like, the point was able to, like, go on in the movie with its emotional resonance. And it was great.
It's amazing. Yeah, this is a very smart movie, and I was more enveloped by its cleverness, the way it's even the jokiness of it is certainly an acquired taste, and there are some jokes that are not quite my taste. I'll be willing to admit that, but that's not the movie's fault. That's a me thing for sure. But I was so enveloped by what Greta and Noah Baumbach were doing. Thematically and the way that the narrative maneuvers around certain things, and you have to just kind of buy into the film's logic, which is so abstract and weird. But they do it in a very smart and clever way, and I have to give them a lot of credit, which is why I do really like this movie. And honestly, I'm liking it more as time goes on because I love the density of it. It's tackling a lot of things, and there are a lot of themes here that in any other movie could seem for lack of a better term, overstuffed. And we sometimes use that criticism for a lot of movies that are thematically overstuffed. And if this weren't a Barbie movie, I might actually throw that criticism at it. But Barbie is an idea that involves everything in some way. So in a way, it's kind of a good excuse for the movie to get away with so many different things. But there is synergy between them all. Like there is a connectivity between all of these ideas, and they do exist in the same socio-political spectrum, if that makes sense. And I think that's where the intelligence of it lies. So very good movie, very good movie. Worth the $150 million it made over the weekend or something like that. That's
160, I think. Now, like,
it
after
might be close to that. Yeah, now that we're recording this.
Yeah, absolutely wild. I loved this movie. Absolutely adored it. And it's interesting because I think we all knew that this film would somehow deconstruct the long-lasting stereotypes around perfectionism with Barbie, but the way Greta Gerwig does that here still blew away all of those expectations. As you guys are talking about, it is really funny, often weird. It's not at all subtle in its commentary and aesthetics, but it is quite humorous. There's that one line from Helen Mirren as the narrator that you're talking about, Brennan, that was absolutely perfect. The soundtrack and musical numbers in this film add great levity as well. Ryan Gosling's I'm Just Ken had me in stitches. Gosling's Ken in general was incredibly absurd, but with great purpose, as we'll talk about. Depression Barbie, oh my God, might be the funniest thing I have seen all year. That commercial is so goddamn good.
BBC Pride and Prejudice miniseries. I just turned to my friend. I was like, I have been perfectly attacked here.
It is perfect.
I love that miniseries.
Incredible writing there. I absolutely love the humor here. I didn't always love the Will Ferrell stuff, but on the whole, this film is a romp that takes full advantage of its premise, and the banter is often very engrossing. Yet simultaneously, as you were talking about there, Lauren, there is a potent emotional core that is so affecting in this film. And while subverting perfectionism is the root of it, I think the film gets deeper and more personal as it examines the burdens women carry and the emotional and perhaps psychological cost of constantly feeling as if you're not good enough. And man, Margot Robbie is so good in bringing that out in her performance. She's really, really great at maneuvering the tonal whiplash that her character goes through in this film. Greta Gerwig, this is another massive win for her. I love this movie. It'll go down as one of the best of the year. I cannot wait to dive more into this as we go here.
Yeah, and I also just want to take a moment to acknowledge America Ferrera's performance, because he also has the hard job of, being the grounded character in the movie. Yeah. She's like the main human, and, it's the least fun role, I guess, if, you had to label it. She's having the least fun of anyone, but she also does such an incredible job grounding everything. And then the way she delivers that monologue, the monologue that is going to go down as like one of those like all-time beloved monologues. And it honestly could be the monologue that snags this screenplay nomination at the Academy Awards. The way she delivers it as if she's coming up with it at that exact moment feels like she's thinking about this and making these realizations about the burdens women carry on the spot. And the way she says it was so resonant that like even when you read the dialogue, I've seen a lot of people posting it. I mean, it's a great monologue even when you read it just written out, but like it doesn't have the same impact as when you hear her saying it. Like our theater erupted into cheers afterwards. Like I kind of crying during it a little bit. Like I just wasn't expecting that emotion from it. And that is a big testament both to the writing, but also to her delivery.
Well, and I think it's great to have a character like that of her age to be in a movie like this. So that way it's not only targeting maybe little girls, for lack of a better term, right? So it's also targeting those that maybe played with Barbies at one point in their life that maybe fell out of love or fell out of connection with it, that are trying to regain that connection. So it adds a level of nostalgia in a certain way by having a character like that, a motherly figure in that role to really springboard those points. And I do love that monologue as well, not just from a performative standpoint, but you know, Lauren, you're talking about the writing there. In any other movie, I feel like in lesser hands, it could be a very like obvious one-sided kind of monologue. But in some ways, there are like weird sprinkling contradictions in it too, acknowledging that our world today, our social climate is kind of one big contradiction in many ways.
And for men too, right? Like I feel like it's not just women, and the movie doesn't only say that women have a burden in this life and men have it easy. Like the Kens have their stuff too.
Yeah, but at the same time, and I saw this on a thread on Twitter. I can't remember who it was, so I can't take credit for it. But this individual, this critic, made a great observation that the film is maybe more anti-patriarchy than it is anti-male, but went out of his way to show that the real world being more male-driven, but Barbie Land being this female utopia of sorts. And I don't think Greta is really necessarily saying we should have one or the other, which is what I think is so refreshing about this movie, and why some of these wild, hateful male takes that they say this movie is carrying is so bizarre to me. I'm like, did you see the same movie as I did? I mean, come on, guys. But I think in many ways that's also sprinkled within America Ferrera's monologue and sort of helps kickstart those interesting contradictions that exist in our world today. And I thought it was quite beautiful.
Yeah, it's interesting the gender dynamics in this film, right? Especially when you consider Gerwig's previous two films, because Little Women and Lady Bird certainly tackled gender norms in some way as well.
Yeah.
But I do love what she does here as it relates to identity and power, because the film is very much arguing that enforcing unrealistic standards on both sides is harmful, whether it be beauty for women or machismo for men, whatever it may be. There are emotional and psychological costs, especially when coupled with any thirst for power, which we see when the Kens inside the matriarchy and how their identities are tethered directly to Barbie, which leaves them lost when Barbie doesn't want them around all of the time. Or on the other side of that coin, the patriarchy leads to women being nothing but objects for the Kens to play their guitars at, for example, which is a really great scene. Exactly. But that is to say, there are no biases here as it relates to masculinity and femininity. And I think the film goes out of its way to demonstrate how gender can be a tool for self-discovery, but also how it's an obstruction inside the confines of societal pillars, which is what makes those ending scenes so powerful, right? Because it suggests that our humanity exists separate from our gender, and that's what really defines us, what really gives us power over our lives. And that final montage in the very end, and in how it demonstrates all that in a very real way, my God, Greta, did you have to kill me like that?
Yeah.
It is so moving. Yes, she did.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. I love all that here.
Yeah, and then there's a final performance by, what's her name? Is it Rhea Perlman or something like that? Yeah, I don't want to reveal who she's playing. I feel like that's best revealed seeing the movie for the first time. But she has a final scene with Margot Robbie and says a couple of choice words that I found even more complimentary to what we're talking about here, and very bravely, uses the idea of Barbie and even patriarchy in the same sentence. Not to say that they're the same thing, but she uses it in the same sentence as if to find some synergy that we need to discover within ourselves outside of those ideas, and it's really profound stuff.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what's interesting too, circling it back to what you guys were talking about with America Ferrera's monologue in this film, and it's interesting when looking at my experience with those ideas and how I saw myself in context of this film, because I was deeply moved by what Greta was doing here, despite the fact that in a lot of ways, I really can't relate with those specific burdens that are being talked about here. And I don't know, what the case is for every guy out there. I've certainly seen those burdens up close. I've seen the effects of it on my wife or the women in my life.
Yeah. Same.
And so there's something incredibly poignant and cathartic about that monologue. And I think it's enthralling to see how the film takes those patriarchal tropes and wields them as a tool to destroy those stereotypes, I'll say vaguely, which is very satisfying on its own. But I think even more gripping in context of Barbie's own emotional turmoil, because right before this rescue sequence that takes place, there's the aforementioned Depression Barbie sequence, a moment that ends in heartbreaking fashion when Barbara reveals that she doesn't feel good enough for anything.
Yeah.
And Robbie is really great. She's really great in the film on the whole, but especially in that sequence, it is quite potent. And when you're constantly asked to, to pander to these two extremes all at once, that feeling of inadequacy is really the only outcome. And Barbie unraveling there, I do think is really powerful. So despite my personal disconnect with those ideas specifically, it's this is to me is the magic of Greta and this film.
Yeah.
She takes that to, at least for me, and I'm sure for many others, that could feel like this distant idea, and she makes it so resonant that you can't help but be as emotionally involved with this film and the characters as everybody else. It's just the magic of Greta. This is really the only way I can say it.
I felt the same way when it came to the themes they were exploring on the male side, where it was like, those aren't things obviously that I can personally relate to, but I've seen, that up close. I've seen men struggle with those types of things, and you feel the Ken struggle. And one thing I love is that I do think it's weird when people have been calling it anti-male. I've seen a lot of that on Twitter and a lot of people saying that it's anti-men.
Did they see a different movie? I am genuinely curious.
So I guess what's funny is that like Greta is the whole idea for like the matriarchy and Barbie's running Barbie land isn't something that Greta just came up with out of thin air. Right. I think that they're all looking at this existing IP, this existing toy, and it is always Barbie. It is Barbie's dream house, Barbie's car, and Ken is just there. That has always been the case. And then, I think there's a line where he says, "There is no just Ken. It's Barbie and Ken," and that comes from the fact that nobody just got a Ken doll. It's just not a thing. So all of that came from actually how the toys really have existed in the world, completely independently of any movie in the first place. So that's where the idea stems from, and that's why she has it being all women led, because the Barbies are this like female empowerment, Nobel Prize Barbie, Dr. Barbie. That is what Barbie had become. So I do think it's weird that it became this whole anti-male thing, but what I loved is that Greta not only could it feel like a girl power movie and has all these amazing feminist themes, but I think that they acknowledged that the Barbies weren't treating the Kens well. That's what
I agree. Yeah.
Which was a very important thing to me, because I was like, it is so sad, the line when they say that, like, Barbie has a great day every day. Ken only has a great day if Barbie looks at him.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was like, that's sad.
That's what I like about this movie, and why I'm with you. I find those anti-male agendas, we'll call them, because that's really what they are. I find them kind of baffling. I don't think this movie is doing that at all. you can watch this movie from the Ken's perspective, and it kind of turns into this tragedy about male ego in many ways, and maybe what sparked it in the first place, which I find so fascinating. Greta is interested in hearing both sides and allowing us as people to have that conversation. And if anything, she's really more acknowledging the utopia aspect of it that could be problematic, right? That there is meant to be this synergy between us, that we have different perspectives that can actually make us work together better if we're willing to listen to one another. And I think she has a lot of interesting things to say about that, but also has a lot of fun with it too. I mean, this is a farce in many ways. Like we're talking very seriously about this movie, but we have to acknowledge that it is in many corners not meant to be taken seriously. And some of the portrayals of the male-dominated real world come off as kind of behind the times in a very direct and obvious way that I couldn't help but laugh. It's almost as if Greta is intentionally, maybe as another theme that's separate from all of this, like attempting to deconstruct the extremism of modern social politics, right? And just the way that it gets almost weaponized nowadays. And maybe that's another aspect that she's targeting here. I don't know, but I like the way that she's taking at it from different angles and really having a lot of fun with it too.
I agree. The farcical nature of the film is really fun. There are a few scenes that I certainly want to talk about here in a moment, but quickly, I want to go back to the Ken conversation because I wanted to echo a lot of what you guys were saying. There's this fascinating dichotomy with the Kens in this film that I think is really, really interesting. And it's interesting to see the conversation that's come about, but I do love this dichotomy because on one hand, the film exposes not just the patriarchy, but the hollow and impractical expectations of societal machismo, right? Because Ken comes from the world of Barbie, where, as you guys are talking about, he's secondary to Barbie. It's Barbie and Ken, and his validation comes directly from Barbie, who clearly isn't as interested in him as he is in her. So when he gets to the quote-unquote real world, and it's antithetical to what he knows, where people ask him for the time, and he's respected in a male-dominated society. It's so good.
At the same time, he also thinks all men drive horses. So,
exactly. I mean,
yeah.
Well, and that's the thing. It's not subtle in that commentary, but I do find it really hilarious. But as a result, he begins to see masculinity in a more rudimentary way, and I find it mesmerizing how the film deconstructs male bravado by paralleling it to Barbie and how worshiping and enforcing certain standards is actually harmful and vapid, which is fascinating because simultaneously it's in the real world where Ken's identity actually prospers there, right? And it begins to roam free like a wild horse running across the plains, one could say. So something is unlocked there for Ken. And it's why ultimately I don't think the film is demonizing masculinity as much as it's suggesting that the superficialities of the patriarchy are anything but fulfilling, and it fails to give him self-worth. There's, of course, a lot of fun to be had with it, especially given Gosling's wonderfully outlandish performance. But those ideas are very, very clever and astute here. Really sharply written by Gerwig and Bob.
And how often, JD, do we talk about we love seeing men as sensitive in movies these days? Because it's just so refreshing to see that, and it just feels so honest in that way. And I like that there is that element that Greta is sprinkling in here too. I think that's why it's almost like thematically appropriate that she chose to write this with Noah Baumbach. So that way, it's almost as if the writing credits themselves are telling you that this is about multiple perspectives. And whether it's direct or not, I like that idea, and it certainly comes through in the final product.
Yeah, I mean, anytime Baumbach and Gerwig want to get together, I'm certainly there for it. And I agree with you. I do think that certainly adds an interesting dynamic here for sure. There's another aspect to this movie that I wanted to talk about because I was floored by this. Did not really see this coming, but I thought it was a really interesting reveal, because the other thing for me when we're looking at Barbie and her arc here is the relationship that she forms with the Gloria character. And I don't want to get into spoilers here, but there is a small redirect that connects the both of them in this way that, as I noted, I found really unexpected.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, the emotional swing by Gerwig here knocked me the F out. And this is very early on in their relationship. It's really not long after Barbie and Gloria meet. Now, I may not be able to relate with Gloria verbatim, as I noted earlier. However, I do have a 7-year-old son who's growing rapidly. And one of my biggest fears is exactly what Gloria depicts here as it relates to memory and playing with your children. And I'm starting to lose it, so forgive me.
Oh, JD, I love you, man. I love when this happens.
I'm trying to hold this together. But
It's so cute.
Sam and I obviously don't play with Barbies, but let's say Legos and Star Wars figures. And there's going to be a day where that comes to an end. And there's a reveal of that with Gloria here, this montage that Gerwig throws in here as this sleight of hand because we think that Barbie is in the real world for someone else, and it ends up not being the case. And why and how that ends up not being the case as it relates to Gloria with this montage that Gerwig shows, this idea that one day your children won't want to play with you anymore, in the case of this film, Barbie specifically, but relating that to my own experience with Sam, it obliterated me. We're 30 minutes into this film, and I'm uncontrollably sobbing.
The magic of Greta Gerwig, right? And she's always been so good at, I think, exploring the relationship between mothers and daughters, or parents and their children. I think she is particularly gifted in that regard. And while it doesn't get maybe as much screen time as it would have benefited from, I think the moments that show those mother-daughter interactions are really really sweet. And it does have one of my favorite lines. I will say one of my favorite lines in the movie, it's not a spoiler, was when she's like driving crazy after trying to save Barbie. And she's like, Mom, where'd you learn to drive like that? And there was this guy, she's like, Dad? She's like, yeah, your dad.
Yeah, something like that, yeah. Well, and that's the thing, to circle back to something you said, Brennan, that the film never loses sight of its farcical and satirical.
Oh,
bite.
no. Sometimes it embraces it so head on that it almost seems distracting. Like the whole chase in the Mattel lobby or the office building is like,
it's so over the top.
I think it might go a little too over the top for my liking. And I think that's kind of the Will Ferrell of it all. Yeah,
Will Ferrell's not for everybody. And like what I've said to other people was that I actually think she might have made that decision because if she portrayed the Mattel executives in like a very straight manner, it would have seemed like an insult. Whereas here it's so over the top that like obviously she's not making commentary on them. That would be my guess as one of the reasons, and obviously
makes sense.
comedy. I think that maybe it works well for me in that regard. But like, it's totally. I think that's the one moment where it's so absurd that I could see someone losing connection to the moment in the story because not even human, or like the people are running into each other.
Yeah, it slowly falls off the rails a little bit. And at the same time, I love the idea of it. I agree with you, Lauren, that it was meant to be portrayed in a very farcical way as to not be an insult. I think the thing with me is, I guess like with Will Ferrell here, once again, I found myself really thinking about his vocal performance in the Lego movie, for instance.
I was going to say, it's very
and it kind of got distracting because I was reminded of something else that also coincidentally happened to be a movie based on a toy product, right? And maybe that was sort of the goal. Maybe there was a meta component there, but
it was a little bit too silly. I think. Of the movie in the real world, everything else is the real world, and in the real world,
that's the big thing for me. It's the jarring.
It's in the real world. In the real world, you see someone running and you run towards them.
You
see them and then run in the opposite direction, and it was like funny and amusing, but it didn't feel like what was supposed to be happening in the real world. It just didn't make total sense. But I enjoyed the bit, and like I like Will Ferrell, so like, but I could definitely see that being people's biggest like. I don't know about this.
and I noted that in my opening thoughts. The Will Ferrell stuff I do think is a bit odd, especially because his scenes are supposed to take place in the quote unquote real world, and yet he's as fake as the quote unquote toys of this film are supposed to be. And so it's this interesting clash that I don't know if it fully works, but I understand why Greta would depict it that way, especially if she is trying to avoid offending certain executives that would maybe not release this film.
But I think as far as silly performances go, I actually think Kate McKinnon is a real standout.
Yeah. And I'm admittedly sort of hit or miss with her in general, but I really liked her in this. She was actually one of my favorite performances, at least of the Barbies themselves. I mean, Margot Robbie, like I said, I think this might be her best performance of her career. At least it's my personal favorite because of what she's asked to juggle between the film's tonal silliness and where it ends up going. And she's the one with the hardest job. Margot Robbie has to play all of those spectrums, sometimes in the same scene. So it's a very, bold performance in that regard. But Kate McKinnon, she doesn't always make me laugh, but she made me laugh here. Maybe it's because of the dexterity of that character, the literal dexterity of her. So a lot of that is also, with regard to the choreography and the art direction, complementing that performance. It's all very well balanced there.
Yeah, Kate McKinnon is great. I loved that sequence in her house there where they reveal all the Barbies that are no longer products.
The discontinued ones,
the discontinued,
or the discontinued Kens. Rob Brydon, one of them. It was amazing.
It's so good. I mean, this supporting cast is
Justice for
quite
Alan.
great. Yes,
I was just gonna say, another one of my favorite performances in the movie was Michael Cera. And again, someone else I'm also very hit or miss on in general, but again, maybe one of my favorite Michael Cera performances. Honestly,
I wish honestly my biggest criticism was we didn't have more Alan, and every moment he was
again is kind of the point, but at the same time, but I love that when he is there, he's like this. He's kind of the pacifist of it all. He's the middleman
until he gets into the fight, and then he's no longer a pacifist.
Yeah,
and I love how that comes out of nowhere, like just not explained at all. Just massive fight. All of a sudden, he's an expert, fighter.
Oh my gosh,
so
and it's
good.
well choreographed too. It's like a Matrix scene all of a sudden.
It's great. Speaking of, I do want to talk about Gerwig's direction here because my goodness, this is an extremely well directed movie. I absolutely love the not so subtle practicality of the film's aesthetics and set design. The fakery of Barbie Land is, of course, thematically pertinent, but I love how it adds to the film's humor and magic. And broadly, it's invigorating to see how she channels classic filmmaking, even if she's heightening it to 11. The tangibility is really stimulating. Perhaps most impressively, though, is how she manages tone here, because the clashing of the over-the-top humor and blistering huge emotion can be jarring, but I think she threads that needle perfectly. And given what the film is attempting to subvert, I think you need both of those extremes to demonstrate the disparity between reality and the societal standard that is impossible to achieve. So I don't see those juxtaposing tones as conflicting as much as they coexist to help render why it's important to free yourself from the patriarchal archetype. And I love Gerwig's balancing act here in that regard. That is really tricky to pull off. And sometimes it is in the same moment, right? Because I mentioned the moment with Gloria where she reveals how Barbie is connected to her. And that is like right before you get into this over the top car chase sequence that we were talking about earlier. Or the moment with Helen Mirren's narrator, that line toward Margot Robbie we mentioned up at the top. That is like in the middle of Barbie unraveling emotionally. So like as the film is getting it into its most cathartic, we also throw in this really funny joke. Like that is so tricky to pull off, but man,
we've seen so many movies fail that try to do that. And I don't think it does here. I'm with you.
She nails it. Anything else? Any final thoughts you guys have on Barbie?
Oh man, where to begin?
There's so much.
There are a couple things I do want to acknowledge. So I guess first thing I want to say is, I did say earlier on in this conversation that I'm still a little undecided on the Ryan Gosling of it all. And I guess I need to back that up a little bit. And a lot of it is really more due to maybe me not being in the right headspace seeing the movie for the first time. And at the same time, too, and this is something no critic should do, and I admittedly kind of did this, and I'm wrong to do this, but I went into this movie already knowing the hype around Ryan Gosling's performance. So I kind of had this preconceived notion already that, oh, he's the standout. People are saying potential Oscar nomination. And naturally, when you go into a movie and you think that, and then you see that performance, your instinct is to say, I'm not sure if I'm quite there. And that kind of harms your judgment on it. So I'm willing to admit that his performance might grow on me, but I think the other thing too is that I was just so enveloped by everything involving Margot Robbie and a lot of the other female characters, especially, that when we got back to his iteration of Ken, I kept thinking I just want to go back to Margot Robbie and what she's going through. So in many ways, maybe my reaction to Ryan Gosling's performance is more of an after effect of how great I thought everything else was. So yeah, so I'll to be continued with his performance for me. I'll say that, but it might grow on me as well.
Can I speak to that real fast?
Of course, yeah.
Because I do love Gosling here, and it's interesting because I believe we were talking about this with Margot Robbie earlier, Lauren. I think you brought it up, but I think the same thing applies with Gosling's Ken. It's really interesting to me how, because we were talking about earlier this duality with the Kens and, how they relate to both the patriarchy and the matriarchy. And I think Gosling does such a great job of rendering this sense of loneliness in Ken that we see early on, that his identity is wholly tethered to Barbie. And that I do think is important for all the reasons we talked about earlier in terms of bringing empathy to both the Barbies and the Kens of this film as it relates to the gender dynamics we've already talked about. And that I think is really great. So when he gets to the real world and we see him exposed to what he considers to be respect and love and attention, even though it is farcical and a little over the top and superficial and full of horsies, he loves it. And he responds to it in such a deep personal way. And I think Gosling does such a great job of bringing that out in his performance. That is the other side of the coin that we saw from him in Barbie Land. And I think he does such a great job of honing into the humor and all of that. But there is this subtle pathos underneath all of that buffoonery that I think makes sense of both sides of that coin, that his identity is wholly tethered to Barbie, but also full on patriarchy. And that's what I'm for now. And it's really great. And so to me, for similar reasons we mentioned with Margot Robbie, even though the emotional complexities of his character aren't quite as extreme as what we get with Barbie, but he does such a great job of, I think, tapping into both sides of that coin that, and I do think that is important because it is easy for a lot of people, I think, to cling on to like only one side of it, which is why they're coming out of the experience feeling offended. And I think without it, maybe there would be some reasons to criticize the film in that way. But that I don't think that's the case at all. I think Gerwig is very astute and attentive in her writing to make sure that she is, as we noted earlier, she's tapping into both sides of the coin in terms of the patriarchy and matriarchy and the fallout of it, like the cost on both sides. And Gosling, I think, is just as important as Margot Robbie in that regard.
Sure.
And I don't know if the film is quite as evocative as it is without it. I guess that is to me to say, I think that is why it is one of the best performances of the year, or at least maybe most important.
It's called Barbie. The movie's called Barbie. And so to have Ken be such a standout, that I think like the fact that so many people are talking about Ryan Gosling when they leave the movie is, again, shows that Gerwig and Baumbach wrote the character to have a prominent enough voice in the movie and a prominent enough arc.
He has a full arc. He has a really clearly defined arc. Yeah.
making an
Absolutely.
impression. And I can understand that, like, maybe if his character doesn't work as well for some people because he is much more cartoonish than Robbie is. Like, you know, that there's that moment that, and I love it, but when he's like sublime,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
definitely has a very specific way he's playing the character in the second half of the film that goes full on cartoonish. That I loved, but again, it's a very specific way he's going about it. He's mixing the emotion with a very heightened machismo character.
Yes.
Then Gerwig and Gosling have to then do this whole musical number, which I think is, again, like, the reason this movie could feel so jarring to some people is that it's doing a lot.
It's every genre. It's every Barbie. It's what it's doing. Yeah.
And I mean, it's just out of nowhere. All right, it's gonna be a musical. The movie's not a musical.
Yeah.
But it's a musical, you know, kind of like that.
It doesn't feel out of place though. That's the weird thing about it.
Yeah, they just decide to do things that aren't consistent with the rest of the movie. Like, let's break the wall. Let's have a musical number just because they feel like it. And there's something unhinged about that I respect the hell out of.
Yeah.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
The exuberance of the choreography and the number itself is just remarkable.
Yeah.
But again, I think there's a tinge. Again, it's subtle because so much of the film is farcical, but there is a tinge of sadness to the character and what's taking place there. And I think about the same thing early on when he asked Barbie, like, can I stay over tonight? And she's like, no, it's girls' night again. And
I don't want
the
you
camera,
to.
the camera lingers on Gosling for a good beat, and you see him utterly deflated. And that to me goes a long way in this film, especially when coupled
that's a great
with,
point. Yeah, those are the things I need to really pay attention to when I see the film again, which I am looking forward to doing. And for how much I praise the film for working on both male and female levels as far as its themes and what it's getting at, perhaps I do need to give a lot of credit to Ryan Gosling to help balance those things out. Although admittedly, at least in the moment, I think a lot of that is really due to how well written Ken is as a character.
That's a big part of it.
And there are cases where the performance can sometimes feel like it's secondary to the great writing of a character, and that's not to say the performance is bad, but I do think a lot of what Baumbach and Gerwig are doing as far as writers of Ken, I think that's a lot of the heavy lifting there in many ways, because he well-written character, and I think those themes are realized because of that. And again, I don't think Gosling's bad in the movie. I just had a very bad sense of comparison. And even in the movie, I was thinking, man, I thought he was so much funnier in The Nice Guys. Again, like, that's not a fair comparison. I'm willing to admit that, but in the moment, I was not in the right headspace to judge that performance, given the hype around it. So,
and also, we don't talk about these kinds of performances for Oscars typically. That's also what's really jarring, is that, like, Barbie has become a beast of another kind. We've not seen a movie like this in recent memory, at least, and so. Typically, this would be a movie that we all loved, and we would leave it at that. But the fact that it's gotten so big that we're talking about the Oscars for a performance that's a little sillier, that's not the kind of thing we usually associate with the Academy Awards, I think that could be jarring when you're hearing that kind of stuff going into the performance. You just expect something different.
I mean, if Melissa McCarthy can get an Oscar nomination for Bridesmaids, then why couldn't someone from Barbie? I mean, it has happened before. It doesn't happen very often, but it is certainly possible. I do want to give some credit to one more final thought that I had here, and that's there's a scene in the trailer, and it's one of my favorite scenes in the movie as well, is a very brief moment, I think maybe a third or so on the way through the film. It's when Barbie and Ken first enter the real world. She sits down on a bench and has a moment with an older lady. First off, and just in the context of the movie, I think it's beautiful knowing that this is Barbie who has seen a very specific depiction of beauty in her world and now sees it differently in this world and acknowledges the beauty there, I think is a very beautiful and powerful notion. But I also just love the execution of it, because my first reaction was, this is staged in a way that this is an important person, I think. And then I didn't know who it was in the moment, but then I went through the cast list on IMDb and I saw, okay, this is Anne Roth, very famous two-time Oscar-winning costume designer, winner of, I think, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, also worked on, what else did she work on? I think it was The Talented Mr. Ripley, maybe, Cold Mountain, all the way dating back to 1969 with Midnight Cowboy. So she's been around, and I love the little acknowledgement to a talent like that works in movies. So it has an almost meta quality there.
I love that it wasn't like like I think we've all seen that interview where they said where Gerwig said that they wanted her to cut that scene because it didn't drive the plot further. That was actually one of the notes we got, that they thought maybe she should cut it because it didn't have a quote unquote purpose driving the plot forward. And she said, if I cut this scene, this is the heart of what I'm doing here. And if I cut this, then why am I making this movie? It was her like thought process. She refused. And I think that I love that she has moments like that maybe it technically could have been taken out and the story would go exactly the same. But I love that when we're dealing with a movie talking so much about physical appearance and perceptions of beauty, that we remember in Barbie land, they haven't been taught to fear aging. They haven't been taught that kind of
they
stuff.
don't know any different.
Kind of stuff in the real world that we are, as women, terrified of aging and going to spend all our money on dermatology treatments, anti-aging stuff, because there's nothing you could do that's worse than age as a woman. But they haven't even, that's not even on their radar. It's not a thing there. So she's able to see an older woman and just look at her and appreciate her for her beauty and for what she is.
Exactly.
Because she's not dealing with the horrors of what we deal with in the real world.
Great point.
And it's really just another beautifully directed moment.
Yeah. And it's incredible to me because for all those reasons you're talking about, but it also comes off the heels of Barbie having this really emotional moment individually when she's trying to connect to the reason she's in the real world to begin with. And she has this ethereal, transcendent experience thinking about herself in the context of some little girl and what Barbie means to her as she's growing up playing with Barbie. And so she has this cathartic emotional moment and starts to cry, something she's never experienced before. Again, the balancing of tones, because there's a nice little joke thrown in there. But it all works. And then that's when she turns to that character. So like it is an incredible moment artistically and quintessentially is why executives are not artists and they should not be telling stories. Like, who cares about plot? Like, there's thematic and emotional resonance here that is important. Right?
Like, it's hardly like a time suck or time drain. Like, minutes, like give it to them.
It's like 30 seconds. Yeah.
Right,
No,
it's ridiculous.
I agree with you guys. So any other thoughts here? Or any other final thoughts?
Honestly, I think that's a perfect note to end on. I think
it's a good movie.
One of the best scenes of the movie and one of the best movies of the year.
Yeah, it's really great. My other final thought here, I love this soundtrack. I think the music in this film, we talked about the Ken song, and it is really great. I just love how this film burst into a musical randomly. But it's really great. And that number in and of itself is, I love the humor of it, but again, there's a tinge of sadness to it that is just so perfect. But I also love how like there's a song in the opening credits of the film that is very meta and speaks to what is actually happening on screen that I think is great. And that Billie Eilish song,
oh
my God, it is so good. so good.
I just love as well. And I was watching the opening credits because clearly this movie has not just one but two really talented composers working on the film, that being Mark Ronson and Andrew Watt, who are more known for like pop music in their own way. But the music supervisor here was George Gerkulius, I think his name is, who worked on some of my favorite rock bands in the past, like bands like the Black Crowes or Screaming Trees, kind of came from like the 90s rock movement, which is such an interesting pairing for the soundtrack to Barbie. And I love when artists like this just work out of their comfort zones. And that's why I think the soundtrack is so quirky in many ways. I love, it doesn't sound like a typical soundtrack. It's weird. And I love that.
Great movie. Please go watch it.
Yeah.
According to the box office, you probably have already, but
I couldn't find parking at the theater for this. It was amazing.
Oh my gosh.
I miss the days like that. I really do.
My theater was absolutely jam packed the day I went to see this, and with Oppenheimer, it was just chaotic at my theater this weekend, and it's usually not that way. So it's very exciting.
Packed here usually in South Florida, and I had a friend just text me right before I jumped onto this podcast. She lives in Boston, and she was like, all Barbie screenings are sold out for like talking about Tuesday and Wednesday. Because I was like,
Yeah.
she's like, I'm going to go during the week because she really didn't want to
Yeah.
deal with the Barbenheimer. She really wanted a calmer experience.
Sure.
And she can't find a ticket for
Wow.
during the weekend. You're going to have to find one, drive a little further to a theater you
Yeah.
don't want to go to because the weekend is going to be worse. So I was
For
like,
sure.
That
Yeah.
didn't even happen when I went to go and see Avatar: The Way of Water. I was still able to get in when I wanted to. Like, I didn't have to deal with a sellout like that.
Yeah.
Again, I miss
Insane.
when these problems existed. This is like such
I
a
know.
nostalgic movie weekend for
It's-
us.
It's good stuff.
Yeah.
Well, Laura, thanks for being here. Absolute pleasure. Really,
Yeah.
really do appreciate you joining us for this conversation.
yeah, thank you so much. I had such a great time.
Where can we find you on social media and your work online?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Lauren Cohen Film. And
Yeah,
I'm also
please-
Next Best Picture.
Yeah, yep. I was
All
just
right.
going to
Can't forget
say
that.
she was on Next Best Picture talking about this. Please go and check that out. We do
Yep.
love Matt Neglia, so please go and check all that out, and please give Lauren a follow.
Yep.
Really do appreciate you being here. Let us know if you agree or disagree with any of our takes. You can hit us up on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or it's not Twitter now. It's X, I guess. I don't even know. I
Aren't
can't
they
keep
called,
up
what are
with
they
it all.
called? There's a new term to call them tweets now. It's just X eat. So what is it called? Like Zeet
It's
or something
so dumb.
like that?
Look, we're on Blue Sky as well, Threads, whatever you're on these days. Just hit us up.
Yeah.
Let us know what you think of this movie. You can also email us your thoughts in sessionfilm@gmail.com. If you're watching us on YouTube, just leave a comment below. With that, thanks everybody for listening, watching. Thanks once again, Lauren, for being here. We will see you all next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Oh man, what a
Go
movie.
pink. Wear pink.